Chapter 7, mainly about dwarves. The two Caelermene soldiers at the head of the column, seeing what they took for a Tarchon or great lord with two armed pages, came to a halt, raised their spears in salute. "O my master," said one of them, "we lead these mannikins to Caelermene to work in the mines of the Tisrock. May he live forever." "By the great god Tash, they are very obedient," said Tyrion. Then suddenly he turned to the dwarfs themselves. About 1 in 6 of them carried a torch, and by that flickering light he could see their bearded faces all looking at him with grim and dogged expressions. "Has the Tisrock fought a great battle, dwarfs, and conquered your land?" he asked, "that you go patiently to die in the salt pits of Puga Hran?" The two soldiers glared up to him in surprise. But the dwarfs all answered, "Aslan's orders. Aslan's orders. He's sold us. What can we do against him?" "Tisrock indeed," added one and spat. "I'd like to see him try it." "Silence, dogs," said one of the chief soldiers. "Look," said Tyrion, pulling Puzzle forward into the light. "It has all been a lie. Aslan has not come to Narnia at all. You have been cheated by the ape. This is the thing he brought out of the stable to show you. Look at it." When the dwarfs saw, now they could see it close, was certainly enough to make them wonder how they had ever been taken in. The lion's skin had gotten pretty untidy during Puzzle's imprisonment in the stable and been knocked crooked during his journey through the dark wood. Most of it was in a big lump on his shoulder. The head, beside being pushed sideways, had somehow gotten very far back so that anyone could now see his silly, gentle, donkeyish face gazing out of it. Some grass stuck out of the corner of his mouth, for he had been doing a little quiet nibbling as they brought him along. And he was muttering, "It wasn't my fault. I'm not very clever. I never said I was." For 1 second, all the dwarfs were staring at Puzzle with wide open mouths. And then one of the soldiers said sharply, "Are you mad, my master? What are you doing talking to the slaves?" And the other said, "And who are you?" Neither of their spears were at salute now. Both were down and ready for action. "Give me the password," said the chief soldier. "This is my password," said the king as he drew his sword. "The light is dawning, the lie broken. Now guard thee, miscreant, for I am Tyrion of Narnia." He flew upon the chief soldier like lightning. Eustace, who had drawn his sword when he saw the king draw his, rushed at the other one. His face was deadly pale, but I wouldn't blame him for that. And he had the luck that beginners do sometimes have. He forgot all that Tyrion tried to teach him that afternoon, slashed wildly. Indeed, I'm sure his eyes might have been shut, and suddenly found, to his own great surprise, that the Caelermene lay dead at his feet. And though that was a great relief, it was, at the moment, rather frightening. The king's fight lasted a second or two longer. Then he too killed his man, and shouted to Eustace, "Where are the other two?" But the dwarfs had settled the two remaining Caelermans. There was no enemy left. "Well struck, Eustace," cried Tyrion, clapping him on the back. "Now, dwarfs, you are free. Tomorrow I will lead you to free all Narnia. 3 cheers for Aslan!" But the result which followed was simply wretched. There was a feeble attempt from a few dwarfs, about 5, which died away all at once. From several others there were sulky growls. Many said nothing at all. "Don't they understand?" said Jill impatiently. "What's wrong with you dwarfs? Don't you hear what the king says? It's all over. The ape isn't going to rule Narnia any longer. Everyone can go back to ordinary life. You can have fun again. Aren't you glad?" After a pause of nearly a minute, a not very nice dwarf with hair and beard as black as soot said, "And who might you be, missy?" "I'm Jill," she said. "The same Jill who rescued King Rillian from the enchantment. And this is Eustace who did it too, and we've come back from another world after hundreds of years. Aslan sent us." And the dwarfs all looked at one another with grins. Sneering grins, not merry ones. "Well," said the black dwarf, whose name was Griffle, I don't know how all you chaps feel, but I feel I've heard as much about Aslan as I want to hear for the rest of my life." That's right, growled the other dwarves. "It's all a plant. All a bloomin' plant." "What do you mean?" said Tyrion. He had not been pale when he was fighting. He was pale now. He had thought this was going to be a beautiful moment, but it was turning out like a bad dream. "You must think we're bloomin' soft in the head, you must," said Griffle. "We've been taken in once, and now you expect us to be taken in again the next minute? We've no more use for stories about Aslan, see? Look at him, old moke with long ears." "By heaven, you make me mad," said Tyrion. "Which of us said that was Aslan? That is the ape's imitation of the real Aslan. Can't you understand?" "Ah, you got a better imitation, I suppose," said Griffle. "No thanks. We've been fooled once, and we're not going to be fooled again." "I have not," said Tyrion angrily. "I serve the real Aslan." "Where's he? Where's he? Show him to us," said several dwarfs. "Do you think I keep him in my wallet, fools?" said Tyrion. "What am I that I can make Aslan appear by bidding? He's not a tame lion." The moment those words were out of his mouth, he realized he had made a false move. The dwarfs at once began repeating, "Not a tame lion, not a tame lion," in a jeering sing-song. "That's what the other lot kept telling us," said one. "Do you mean you don't believe in the real Aslan?" said Jill. "But I've seen him. He sent us two here out of a different world." "Ah, ha, ha, ha," said Griffle with a broad smile. "So you say. They've taught you your stuff all right. Sang your lessons, aren't you?" "Churl!" cried Tyrion. "Will you give a lady the lie to her very face?" "You keep a civil tongue in your head, mister," replied the dwarf. "I don't think we want any more kings, if you are Tyrion, which you don't look like him to me. No more than we want any Aslans. We're going to look after ourselves from now on and touch our caps to nobody. See?" "That's right," said the other dwarfs. "We're on our own now. No more Aslan. No more kings. No more silly stories about other worlds. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs." And they began to fall into their paces and set ready for marching back to wherever they had come from. "Little beasts," said Eustace. "Aren't you even going to say thank you for being saved from the salt mines?" "Ah, we know all about that," Griffle said over his shoulder. "You wanted to make use of us. That's why you rescued us. You're playing some kind of game of your own. Come on, you chaps." And the dwarfs stuck up their queer little marching song, which goes with the drum beat, and off they tramped into the darkness. Tyrion and his friends stared after them. Then he said a single word. "Come." And they continued their journey. They were a silent party. Puzzle felt himself to be still in disgrace, and he didn't really quite understand what had happened. Jill, besides being disgusted with the dwarves, was very impressed with Eustace's victory over the Caelermene and felt almost shy. As for Eustace, his heart was still beating rather quickly. Tyrion and Jewel walked sadly together in the rear. The king had his arms on the unicorn's shoulder, and sometimes the unicorn nuzzled the king's cheek with a soft nose. They did not try to comfort one another with words. It wasn't very easy to think of anything to say that would be comforting. Tyrion had never dreamed that one of the results of the apes setting up a false Aslan would be to stop people from believing in the real one. He had felt quite sure that the dwarfs would rally to his side the moment he showed them how they'd been deceived. The next night, he would have led them to the stable hill, shown Puzzle to all the creatures, and everyone would have turned against the ape, and perhaps, after a scuffle with the Caelermenes, the whole thing would have been over. But now it seemed he could count on nothing. How many other Narnians might turn the same way as the dwarfs? "Somebody's coming after us, I think," said Puzzle suddenly. They stopped, listened. Sure enough, there was a thump, thump of small feet behind them. "Who goes there?" shouted the king. "Only me, sire," came a voice. "Me, Poggin, the dwarf. I've only just managed to get away from the others." "I'm on your side, sire, and on Aslan's. If you can put a dwarfish sword in my fist, I'd gladly strike a blow on the right side before all's done." Everyone crowded around him and welcomed him and praised him and slapped him on the back. Of course, one single dwarf could not make a very great difference, but it was somehow very cheering to have even one. The whole party brightened up. But Jill and Eustace didn't stay bright for very long, for they were now yawning their heads off and too tired to think of anything but bed. It was at the coldest hour of the night, just before dawn, that they got back to the tower. If there had been a meal ready for them, they would have been glad enough to eat, but the bother and delay of getting one was not to be thought of. They drank from the stream, splashed their faces with water, and tumbled into their bunks, except for Puzzle and Jewel, who said they would be more comfortable outside. This perhaps was just as well, for a unicorn and a fat, full-grown donkey indoors always makes a room feel rather crowded. Narnian dwarfs, though less than 4 feet high, are, for their size, about the toughest and strongest creatures there are, so that Poggin, in spite of his heavy day and late night, woke fully refreshed before any of the others. He at once took Jill's bow, went out and shot a couple of wood pigeons. Then he sat plucking them on the doorstep and chatting to Jewel and Puzzle. Puzzle looked and felt a good deal better this morning. Jewel, being a unicorn, and therefore one of the noblest and most delicate of beasts, had been very kind to him, talking to him about things of the sort they could both understand, like grass and sugar and the care of one's hooves. When Jill and Eustace came out of the tower yawning and rubbing their eyes at almost 10:30, the dwarf showed them where they would gather plenty of Narnian weed called wild fresney, which looks rather like our wood sorrel, but tastes a good deal nicer when cooked. It needs a little butter and pepper to make it perfect, but they hadn't had these. So that when, with one thing after another, they had the makings of a capital stew for their breakfast, or dinner, or whatever they chose to call it, Tyrion went a little further into the wood with an axe, and brought back some branches for fuel. While the meal was cooking, which seemed a very long time, especially as it smelled nicer and nicer the nearer it came to being done, the king found a complete dwarfish outfit for Poggin: mail, shirt, helmet, shield, sword, belt, and dagger. Then he inspected Eustace's sword and found that Eustace had put it back in the sheath all messy from killing the Caelermene. He was scolded for that and made to clean and polish it. All this while Jill went to and fro, sometimes stirring the pot and sometimes looking out enviously at the donkey and the unicorn who were contentedly grazing. How many times that morning she wished she could eat grass. When the meal came, everyone felt it had been worth waiting for, and there were second helpings all round. When everyone had eaten as much as they could, the 3 humans and the dwarf came and sat on the doorstep. The 4-footed ones lay down facing them. The dwarf, with both permission from Jill and from Tyrion, lit his pipe. And the king said, "Now, friend Poggin, you have more news of the enemy belike than we. Tell us all you know, and first, what tale do they tell of my escape?" "A cunning tale, sire. Cunning as ever was devised," said Poggin. "It was the cat, Ginger, who told it, and most likely made it up too. This Ginger, sire, he is a sly boots, if ever a cat was. And he was walking past the tree to which those villains bound your majesty, and he said, saving your reverence, that you were howling and swearing and cursing Aslan. Language I wouldn't like to repeat were the words he used, looking ever so prim and proper. You know the way a cat does when it pleases. And then, says Ginger, Aslan himself suddenly appeared in a flash of lightning and swallowed your majesty up in one mouthful. All the beasts trembled at this story, and some fainted right away. Of course, the ape followed it up. There, he says, see what Aslan does to those who don't respect him? Let that be a warning to you all. And the poor creatures wailed and whined and said, it will, it will. So that in the upshot, your majesty's escape has not set them thinking whether you still have loyal friends to aid you, but only making them more afraid and more obedient to the ape. What a devilish policy, said Tyrion. This Ginger, then, is in close with the ape's counsels. It's more a question by now, sire, if the ape is in his counsels, replied the dwarf. The ape has taken the drinking, you see. My belief is that the plot is now mostly carried on by Ginger and Rishta. That's the Kalermine captain. And I think some of those words that Ginger has scattered amongst the dwarves are chiefly to blame for the scurvy return they made you. And I'll tell you why. One of those dreadful midnight meetings had just broken up the night before, and I had gone a bit the way home when I found I left my pipe behind. It was real good an old favorite, so I went back to look for it. But before I got to the place where I'd been sitting, it was black as pitch there, I heard a cat's voice say, meow, and a Kalerman voice say, here, speak softly. So I just stood still as if I was frozen. And these two were Ginger and Rishta Tarkhan, as they call him. Noble Tarkhan, said the ape in that silky voice of his. I just wanted to know exactly what we both meant today about Aslan meeting no more than Tash. Doubtless, most sagacious of cats, said the other. You have perceived my meaning. You mean, said Ginger, that there's no such person as either. All who are enlightened know that, said the Tarkhan. Then we can understand each other, purred the cat. Do you, like me, grow a little weary of the ape? A stupid, greedy brute, said the other. But we must use him for the present. Thou and I must provide for all things in secret and make the ape do our will. And it would be better, wouldn't it, said Ginger, to let some of the more enlightened Narnians into our council, one by one as we find them apt. For the beasts who really believe in Aslan may turn at any moment, and will if that ape's folly betrays his secret. But those who care neither for Tash nor Aslan have only an eye to their own profit, and such reward as the Tisrock may give them when Narnia is a Kalermine province. That will be firm. Excellent cat, said the captain, but choose which ones carefully. While the dwarf had been speaking, the day seemed to have changed. It had been sunny when they sat down. Now Puzzle shivered. Jewel shifted his head uneasily, and Jill looked up. It's clouding over, she said. It's so cold, said Puzzle. Cold enough, by the lion, said Tyrion, blowing his hands. And, what foul smell is this? Ugh, gasped Eustace. It's like something died. Is there a dead bird about somewhere? And why didn't we notice it before? With great upheaval, Jewel scrambled to his feet, pointed with his horn. Look, he cried. Look! Look at it! Look! Then all six of them saw, and over their faces came an expression of uttermost dismay. And that's the end of chapter 7. Just when we hoped that the tide had turned and perhaps the danger was about to pass, I think the real danger has presented itself. It was bad enough that there was a deception, that there was a false Aslan who was giving orders through the ape that would seek to enslave the free beasts and dwarfs. But the consequence, whether intended or not, actually may be more devastating than the original lie. And that is, even once the lie is exposed, now, what can anyone possibly trust? What can anyone possibly believe? That's the shocking turn with the dwarfs. Rather than be happy, overjoyed, grateful even, that it was all a lie, that it was a con game exposed, and now they could fight back and be free. Instead, with bitterness in their hearts and selfishness, they've decided, well, we don't want any of this. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me once, fool me twice, shame on me. In this instance, it means, well, we're just not going to listen anymore. Real Aslan, false Aslan. Real king, false king. We just don't care anymore. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs. Sometimes said that the opposite of love is hate. Well, there's another school of thought that says the opposite of love is indifference, not caring at all. And I fear the real danger is precisely that. A Narnia that neither loves nor hates Aslan and one another. The terrible fear that now nobody even cares.